Hi, it's me. It's the 16th of October 2020, and this is the latest Built from Scratch episode. So, I am feeling fairly happy and upbeat. I wasn't 10 minutes ago. I was feeling distinctly annoyed with myself, having largely wasted the last day and having discovered that I'd made a significant mistake which had wasted quite a lot more time in the past. So I'll tell you all about that. But I think I want to start just by prefacing it with an acknowledgement of the fact that making these built from scratch videos with their attached promise of documenting everything I do and with total transparency is occasionally quite a tough thing to do, because if I have a bad day or do something stupid, I'm obliged to talk about that. And I'm not the most egotistical of people. I guess if I was, I probably wouldn't be doing this. But I do have some kind of ego and pride, and that makes it kind of difficult to sit and talk about how rubbish I've been. But there you go. This is what I've set out to do, so I guess I've got to do it. So what's gone on is, firstly, yesterday I just wasted the day. It was ludicrous. It's like I've got some kind of problem with the idea of producing content. And to be honest, actually, I know what the problem is. I am scared that I'm going to put weeks or months into putting articles out there which are not the right thing to do for some reason, for one or some of the various reasons that I suppose they could be not the right thing to do, and I don't want to risk wasting all that time and effort. But that's a pretty ridiculous position. I know enough about online marketing to know the type of thing that I need to do and roughly how to do it, and I really ought to just get on with it. But anyway, I think that's the sort of psychological reason why I kind of just messed about yesterday. The slightly worthwhile thing that I did was to start the day reading a couple of articles off the Authority Hacker blog. Both of them, I think, written by Perrin, the guy who used to be with Spencer Hawes at Niche Pursuits, now running an agency as far as I can see, but also around 2018, apparently, I didn't realise this until yesterday, but actually did some work with the Authority Hacker guys. So I read a couple of his excellent articles on copywriting, basically. And there was some value there. He lays out his thoughts on, well, more than thoughts, his processes around planning articles and writing them quickly. And he says some things which are of particular value to me about how to move away from perfectionism and just put out something that is B+ standard, and to do so quickly. A particular sentence is now lodged in my brain where he is talking about perfectionism in the context of writing and says that it is a business killer, in bold no less. And I think it probably is, or it certainly could be, for a person in my situation doing this kind of business where, you know, I have limited resources, it's just me, and the nature of the business at this stage at least is written content, primarily. Because perfectionism could, or probably generally does, slow down the process of writing stuff enormously. And at this stage of things, what I need to be doing is just pushing things out with a degree of rapidity. So I am glad I read them, and some of those things will stay with me as I start to actually write content. But then what I did that was of less value is to spend pretty much half a day starting to learn touch typing. In fairness, that was something suggested, or I think implied as a good thing. Oh no, it was definitely suggested in this article that I read because Perrin linked to a touch typing website. But you know, you can't go along with what everyone says just because they're an authority. You have to tailor things to your own abilities and needs to some degree, and I should have left that alone. Because firstly, my typing is not bad. I'm not a 2-finger peck at the keyboard typer. I have to look at the keyboard when I'm typing to a degree. I can glance away from it, but I mostly have to look at it. But if I'm looking at it, I can type fairly quickly and accurately. In fact, I did a quick test at the end of the day just to help me decide whether to do any more touch typing learning or not, and my speed was about 63 words per minute with 3 typos in it, which is, from what I can see of what's written online about touch typing speeds, that is fairly reasonable. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing like as fast or accurate as a highly trained touch typist, but it's not bad. Which brings me to the second reason that I don't need to care about it and shouldn't have wasted any time on it, which is that I'm not going to be doing the types of jobs that professional touch typists use their skills for, which would mean things like listening to a person speaking and transcribing it then and there. I mostly just need to use typing for writing articles, which I'll be researching as I go along, which means there will be breaks during the typing process as I find out extra bits and pieces to include. And also there's just no really strict time limits around how long I spend typing something. There is a need to produce this stuff reasonably quickly, but not crazy. My keyboard doesn't have to be on fire, 100 plus words per minute. So having put about 4 or 5 hours into starting to learn touch typing, I decided I just don't need to learn it. So there you go. I ended yesterday a little bit annoyed with myself about that. And then I came back to work today, and just to point out, I'm making this video 2.5 hours into today, which is not how I normally try to do things. I normally make the video right at the start of the day and just talk about yesterday's activities, but I got stuck into this little thing today, and it's turned out to be something that I wanted to get to the end of, and now that I've got to the end of it, I want to immediately make a video covering, well, firstly, yesterday, but also what's gone on with this today. So what happened was, I was actually getting into keyword research for the first piece of content, like I should have been doing. And as ever, one of the tools that I opened to do that was Ahrefs. And in there, I couldn't help but notice that the site health, I think they call it, of the .co.uk site had decreased a few points. So I probably shouldn't have done this. I should have just got on with what I was doing, but I clicked into it to see what was going on there. And it said that I had a few pages which had duplicate content issues. So I looked at that, and it turns out that it was showing the blog posts page as having 2 duplicate pages, one of which was the uncategorized category page. So in other words, the category page that shows every blog post I've written that is not categorized, which is all of my blog posts, because I haven't put them into categories, and to be honest, I don't know that I ever will. So that makes sense that it would be showing that as duplicate content, because given that it's every blog post I've written, that page therefore looks exactly the same as my actual blog post page, which also shows every blog post I've ever written. The other one was my author page. Because I'm the only author on the site, that page also shows every blog post I've ever written. So again, it's exact duplicate content. So it was correct to show me that that was an issue. And I therefore started doing a bit of research around what to do about that. The conclusion I drew about that... Oh man, what is going on with these glasses? I think what it might be is that my phone is doing too many things. It's the phone that sends these pictures across the glasses. I'm also using it for broadband at the moment, because the broadband I've got here is ridiculously slow, and obviously it's doing all the other things. Oh, it's also recording in Otter this speech and transcribing it, and it's also doing all the other things that a phone does too. So I think maybe it just freaks out every now and then. Anyway, so I was saying the conclusion I drew about how to handle those duplicate content pages was to no index the category and author pages, which just means sending an instruction to Google via the code of the website to say please ignore these two pages, at which point the duplicate content issue goes away, because there is only one page that you're actually asking them to care about. So then I had to figure out how to no index pages in WordPress. It's a fairly simple thing to do in theory, or at least the way that I know to do it is just to open the robots text document, and you can write in there essentially what you want Google to not show. But it's something I've ever only done in like an actual text document that I've uploaded to a website before. I don't know how to do that in WordPress, so I had to do a quick bit of research in how to do that. And sorry, I'm just trying to remember the flow of how this happened. Oh yeah, so almost all the documentation I could find referenced Yoast, the SEO plugin, which I can't, or we get into the crux of the matter in a second, I thought I couldn't use because of the previously spoken about issue of site-wide canonical tags. So it got me thinking about that whole issue again of not being able to use the SEO platforms like Yoast. Because whilst I've found a solution of not using one of them and using 3 or 4 other smaller plugins to replace some of the functionality that I've lost by not using a big platform, every new thing that I come across that requires me to use another workaround or another plugin makes the argument go more in favour of using one of the big plugins, because there are issues with using multiple small plugins. You have to learn how to use them all. Well, you have to research them in the first place to discover them, then you have to learn how to use them, and then there are issues around, well, if I don't use them for a couple of years or don't get involved in, canonical tags or hreflang tags for a couple of years, and then I do have to do something with them again, I've then got 4, 5, 6 plugins to sort of work my way through again. You have to update them all, and because they're small plugins, they're relatively likely to stop receiving support at some point, in which case if you want to keep using them, there's an increasing security risk by having them on your site. So it was a far from ideal solution, and like I say, with every extra bit of functionality that you have to find a workaround for, that problem grows incrementally. So this got me back to, therefore, thinking about the basic issue of the site-wide self-referencing canonical tags that Yoast and the other big platforms insist, as far as I can see, on placing on your site. And I decided to research it by way of tweeting the guy who'd written the article that I had predominantly relied on when I was doing my research around this in the first place. I probably mentioned him before. He's called Owen Hen. He owns a company called SearchView, View spelt VIU, and his company basically do large-scale site migrations. So he is a technical SEO expert, particularly when it comes to this sort of thing, and he's written a couple of really good articles about hreflang tags, and one in particular about their relationship with canonical tags. So I wrote him a text saying, a tweet saying, "Sorry to bother you, I've got this problem. Is there an unacceptable clash between self-referencing canonical tags and hreflang tags?" And I sent that off to him. And then he was then in my mind, I went back to that article he'd written about canonical and hreflang tags and how they interact. And the end of this story is, I read that article again, and it was so obvious what the answer was for me in this position. I cannot now understand how I didn't get this in my head the first time round. And the answer is that if the pages in question have got self-referencing canonical tags and hreflang tags, that is absolutely fine. Because the message that you're sending to Google there is, each page is saying, I am the canonical page for this information. And then you're kind of overlaying on top of that an instruction with the hreflang tags that are kind of saying, I'm the important page for this area or this language, and if you want to know which is the important page for this stuff in this other regional language, then go and look here instead. And the here instead page is saying the exact same in reverse, if you see what I'm saying. So it all works. You know, you've got one page that is saying to Google, I am the page to look at if you're German, and it's saying I am the page to look at through a canonical tag, and it's saying I am the page to look at if you're German through the hreflang tag. There's no conflict there. And then you've got the British page that's saying I am the page to look at for this content, and I am the page to look at for British content. So there's no real clash there. The only sort of clash is that every page with its self-referencing canonical is saying I am the page to look at for this content, and that content is the same. But that happens on so many, essentially from what I've read, I don't think Google has a big problem with that. The worst that's going to happen is it's just going to ignore your canonical tags, because they're all just basically saying the same thing. Every page is the page to look at for the content on that page. So there's no clash and there's no problem, which means that I am an idiot, because I must have spent I'm going to guess if I stripped out the other little bits of work that I was doing in between it and just condensed the time I took on researching hreflangs, implementing them, and then finding those plugins and those workarounds for not being able to use an SEO plugin, I reckon that was 3, 4, maybe even 5 days work, which is a lot to waste at the moment. And the weird thing is, thinking back now, I cannot understand how I didn't correctly read and interpret that article. The one that Owen wrote on site structure, country code top-level domains versus generic top-level domains, which I also spent quite a lot of time reading and working around and making a decision with regards to. That was a long, fairly complicated article that required some interpretation. But the one about canonicals and hreflangs is actually really quite short and straightforward. So, there you go. Quite annoyed with myself. However, as I said at the start of the video, I am actually feeling fairly happy because I do now have what I'm fairly certain is the correct answer, and it comes with a large other benefit, which is that I can now start using Yoast or one of those other platforms if I want to, and I think I probably do want to, much as it's going to hurt to deactivate and delete those various other plugins that I spent all that time lovingly searching for and using. It just makes sense to do so. I've heard very little bad about Yoast. It has the slight problem that if I want to use some of the features in it, I think perhaps not now, but in the future I might have to pay for them. But that's no big deal. You know, if something is good and has stuff that you want to use, then paying for it is not really a big problem. I'm aware that they've had a couple of issues in the past that has actually caused problems for sites, but because they're quite big and presumably fairly well funded, I believe they get problems sorted out too. And then I guess I've just heard people make general comments about how it's a sort of relatively large, bloated bit of software to add to your WordPress site, and I guess the idea is it could slow it down a bit, but I've not really heard any serious evidence of that being a problem. And again, I think if people start to recognise that it was causing problems with site speed, then they would probably do something about it. So that is the plan. One other small positive thing to wrap up with is that I am really starting to like Twitter as a means to engage with people. And that's because of two things. Just a fun one from last night. Spencer Hawes, the guy who runs Niche Pursuits, and who is, because I'm a bit of an internet marketing loser, he's a minor hero of mine, and I tweeted him yesterday. I can't remember why now. What was I going on about? Oh, he wrote something about... Oh, come on, Dave. He wrote about how he's about to delete a couple of 100 old posts off Niche Pursuits, which to me, as someone who is desperately trying to just get some content on my site, is kind of mind-blowing, the idea that you would ever delete something. But I wanted to try and say something vaguely interesting or useful, and so I just wrote back to him saying, is that a crawl budget thing? Weren't you getting any traffic to those pages? And lo and behold, he actually wrote back to me and said, yeah, it is those two things. So that was very cool. But more constructively, after I sent that tweet to Owen Hen, he actually got back to me like literally 10 minutes later, with a response. But sorry, I just need to point out, in the meanwhile, I'd reread his article, come to this conclusion that I've just laid out in detail, and I'd actually gone back to my original tweet and replied to it saying, sorry about that, don't bother replying, I've just reread your article and now I get it. But as I was writing that, it would appear he was writing back to me already saying, well, essentially what I've just said about how there isn't much of a clash between those two types of tags if used in that way. And then he saw what I'd written and wrote back to that saying, sorry, I was writing this whilst you were writing your reply, glad you've got it up and running, sort of thing. So that's just amazing. What a brilliant way of getting in touch with people. I mean, he's a guy who runs a company that I assume is, his full-time job. I assume he's quite a busy chap, and he doesn't know me from Adam and owes me nothing. And yet, I write to him and he responds straight back with a useful little bit of information, or at least it would have been useful if I hadn't already have just gone back to his original article and figured it out. So that's great. I don't know if I'll end up actually using Twitter in a kind of networking, content marketing kind of way. Maybe not. But what I definitely am learning this week is that it's a brilliant way of actually just getting in touch with people and, having fun and or getting a little bit of advice. So that's excellent. So that's it for today. I'm now off to actually change that setup, install Yoast most probably, get rid of those plugins, get those site-wide canonicals on the site, and make sure the hreflangs haven't been interrupted by the changes that I'm about to do, and then actually no index the category and author pages, which is what started this whole thing off today. And then I'll feel really quite happy that the whole sort of technical SEO stuff that needs to go on with the WordPress site is now being handled, or that at least I have got one place to go if I need to change things in the future. So that will actually be great. And then, what is it? I've still got sort of 5.5 hours today, and I think that, although there's a few working parts to deal with there, I don't actually think it's going to take me that long. So then I can get back to that little bit of keyword research I was doing at the start of the day, choose an article, and I promise, absolute promise, I will have written at least 1,000 words of it by the time I make the next video. I promise.